Hello and welcome back to my channel. I was sitting in the car scrolling on Instagram the other day and I came across this very cute jacket here and I just knew that I had to make it. So that's what we're doing in today's video. So I went and got on Pinterest because I wanted to find out more about the jacket, and I did find a lot of pictures of girls wearing the jacket, but it was very hard for me to figure out where the jacket was from. Like, I could not figure it out or find it for the longest time. And then I finally found one on AliExpress's website and I realized the jacket is actually a very cheap jacket, which caught me by surprise. I did go and study the jacket a little bit. This is the progress I've made so far. I even have a sleeve, which at this point I didn't know exactly how I was going to attach it to the jacket yet, but I was happy to be making progress. But let me first go and show you how I got to this point here. First, I needed to make a pattern. So I traced my favorite oversized hoodie. I have a video that I will link on how I trace clothes to create sewing patterns if you want more details. But yes, I traced out the front of my hoodie and this is where I landed. Then I measured 5 inches down from the front neckline and 4 inches down from the shoulder, and I drew a line connecting these points to create this seam here. And I traced a line 3 inches from the edge like this for this seam here. I don't know if that's a seam on the actual jacket or just top stitching, but I decided to go with the seam. The armhole is pretty wide on this jacket, so I lowered the armhole by 2 inches on my pattern. There's no seam allowance added to these, so when I go and cut these from the fabric, I'm going to add seam allowance to all of these sides and cut 2 of each. And this is how I'm going to cut the pieces for the front lining. Then I went and folded my hoodie the opposite way, and I'm going to trace the back of my hoodie onto the paper. Now for the back, my favorite part of the whole jacket, we have the shoulder pleat. So I'm going to put a mark 2 inches from the shoulder points and trace this onto my paper from that mark down to the bottom. Then I'm going to move this over 2 inches like this, and I'm going to trace the rest of this onto my paper. Kind of like doing the slash and spread method without actually slashing. And then the jacket has a curved seam here, so I'm going to mark that onto my paper and then lower the armhole 2 inches like I did for the front. Before I cut on this curved line, I'm going to cut my back lining with this on the fold of my fabric. Then I cut this on a curved line, and I'm going to cut the bottom piece on the fold, adding seam allowance to every side except of course the side cut on the fold, and the top in 2 pieces, adding seam allowance to each side. I'm going to be using this faux suede fabric I got from Joann's. It has no structure, so I'm going to be adding interfacing to it. So now I have pattern pieces for the front of my jacket and the back of my jacket, and I'm going to start with those and just figure out the sleeve situation as I go. I'm going to go cut them from my fabric, and then I'm going to go and press interface into all of these pieces. As I was pressing the interface into the pieces, they were warping and losing their shape sometimes and getting wavy, and it was just difficult to work with, and I feel like the sew-in interfacing would have made that process much easier. So next time I'm definitely going to be using the sew-in interfacing. I started with assembling the back first. I sewed these 2 top pieces together, right sides facing. Then I pressed the seam open and top stitched along each side with my white thread. Then I went and used my clips to attach the bottom piece to this, right sides facing, and I'm going to sew this on, press that seam downward, and do my 2 rows of top stitching. Here are the pieces for the front, and these are the pieces for the welt pocket. This is 3 by 6 inches, and this one here is 8 by 6 inches, and they're both pressed to interfacing. I'm going to put the pocket pieces to the side right now and start by putting these bottom fronts right sides facing and sewing them together. I pressed that seam open and top stitched slow and steady because any imperfections in the stitching will show with this white thread against the red. Then I went and sewed the top front piece to this, right sides facing, press that seam upward, and then did 2 rows of top stitching again. I love the contrast. And now with this all sewn together, I need to go and add a welt pocket. And I'm going to be switching the thread on my machine to a thread that matches this fabric because the pocket is like hidden on that jacket, kind of like you can't really see it there. I went and drew a 1/2 inch by 6 inch rectangle on here, 1 inch down from the top edge, only this actually needs to be drawn on the back, and I'm going to sew this onto the front where I want my pocket opening to be, right sides facing, stitching along this rectangle. Then I cut down the center and into the corners and turned this to the inside and pressed it. I folded this up and then down to create the welt of the pocket. It should match up with my 3 by 6 inch piece at this point, and it does, so I stitched it in place. I'm going to sew on the lining pocket piece like this and on this piece like this. Then I'm going to sew these together right sides facing just around the 2 pocket pieces. I decided that I'm going to extend the armhole down another 2 inches, which I already did on this side. So I'm going to go and cut this armhole down another 2 inches as well, and I'm going to do the same thing for the back. I think I figured out how I'm going to get that sleeve coming out of a sleeve look. I went and I cut a facing for the front and for the back that is 3.5 inches wide. I just traced around the armhole onto my jacket and made this back facing 3.5 inches wide too. Now that I have facings for both the back armholes and the front armholes, I'm going to sew the back to the front, but first I'm going to go and stitch in the pleats at both back shoulders. So I'm going to fold the extra that I added earlier when making the pattern so that the shoulder is the length it was before I added that extra in there. I top stitched that pleat in place. Then I sewed the fronts to the back right sides facing. I wasn't loving how far out this was bulging, so I went and changed the angle of my pleat and did a shorter top stitching. Now I have these holes though because felt and real suede and leather leave permanent holes, so that's just something to be aware of when working with this material if you choose to work with it. Okay, so now I'm going to go and sew the collar and the waistband to this jacket. I already did go and sew the collar together, and I did record that process, but I accidentally deleted the footage of me sewing this together, so there will not be footage of me putting this together. But if you go and look at my Zara inspired fall jacket video, the collar was done the same exact way. I even used the same pattern, and you'll see exactly what I did to put this together. But anyway, I'm going to go and sew this onto the neckline of this jacket, and I'm going to go and add the waistband to the bottom of the jacket. This rib knit here I seam ripped in and reusing, so it was already cut to size. And then I went and cut 2 of these rectangles the length of the rib knit by 3.5 inches from the faux suede, and pressed interface into them, and I'm going to sew 1 to each end of the rib knit like this. Then I'm going to use my clips to attach this to the bottom of my jacket, stretching the rib knit to match the length of my jacket's bottom edge. Then I went and used clips to attach my collar to the neckline. I sewed those on, only when I sewed the waistband on, I sewed just one side of the suede part like this, and then I sewed the rest of the waistband folded in half, and that was so I could add my zipper. Winter is right around the corner, so I'm going to be adding a layer of polyfill quilt batting to my lining pieces, and that's going to make my jacket look a little bit like a puffy jacket compared to the original, but I'm okay with that because I want to be warm and I want to be comfortable. It's getting cold. I don't want to have to wait till next fall or spring to comfortably wear this jacket, so I'm going to add this in so the jacket's warm and comfortable and I can get some wear out of it immediately. I went and added the pleats to the back shoulders and so the fronts to the back right sides facing, and I'm going to add this to my jacket now. With the waistband folded to the inside, I pinned the lining to the jacket right sides facing, only here I pinned it to the other side of the suede alone like this. And with the collar folded to the inside, I used my clips to attach the 2 together at the neckline and alongside the zipper sides. I sewed the lining to the suede part of the bottom first, then sewed the rest of the bottom edges together. And once it was all sewn together, I turned it right side out through the armhole and top stitched. I did the top stitching along the side of the zipper and around this little bottom piece here and around the bottom. I am very happy with this. It looks a lot like the inspo. And now all I need to do to be done with this project is to add the sleeves. I already started the process on this side, if you can see that. I'm going to go and finish adding the sleeve on this side, and then I'm going to show you how I did it on this side. So I want to make sure it works out first over here, and then I'll show you what I did. So be right back. And here it is. I still have like 2 steps left to go to complete this sleeve, but it's looking really good and I think it's gonna work. So I'm gonna go and attach the other sleeve. I went and traced the sleeves of my hoodie in 2 separate pieces, the front and the back. So I'm going to cut 2 of these front sleeves from my fabric and 2 of the back sleeves. And then for the shoulder of this sleeve, I took the facing I made earlier and traced that onto my paper like this. Then I took the original pattern before I lowered the armhole and I angled it a bit like this and traced it onto my paper like this. And I did the same thing for the back facing, and I'm going to cut 2 of each out. Here are my front and back sleeve pieces after I pressed interfacing to them. I'm going to sew them together, right sides facing along the straight edge. Then I sewed the front and back shoulder pieces together along the shoulder edge. I pressed both these seams open and I'm going to trace this sleeve onto my lining fabric, and I cut 2 from the lining before I go and do my 2 rows of top stitching on the sleeve. I'm going to use my clips to attach this sleeve to the armhole of the shoulder piece. Then I went and sewed the sides of this sleeve together. Now I'm going to pin this wristband to the armhole of my sleeve, right sides facing, and I'm going to sew it on. I went and created the same sleeve and shoulder from my lining, and I'm going to sew this to my other sleeve along the armhole with the wristband folded inside like this. And I'm going to base stitch the edge of the lining sleeve to the outer sleeve. Now I'm going to sew the front facing to the back facing for the outer and lining fabric. Then I'm going to line up the 2 wrong sides facing and sew this to the armhole of my jacket, right sides facing. Once that's all sewn, I'm going to turn this to the inside of the jacket and I'm going to sew my 2 rows of top stitching. And here's how that's looking. I'm going to use clips to attach my sleeve to this like this, and I'm going to sew the 2 together. Once that was sewn together, I went and finished that raw edge with bias tape, and I went and stitched the facing to the outer jacket along the side and shoulder seams to prevent the whole thing from coming out, and that completes this project.
Does it feel like I belong? Trying to keep it alive on this hungry side for a man.